Hey guys, thanks for checking out the My Career Path podcast. Today I have another awesome interview with Dawn Brooks. And Dawn actually started her own organizational business with her daughter a year or two ago and is now doing really well. And so she shares her story about how she kind of figured out what her strengths are and just kind of jumped in and leaned into those to really make a really awesome career for herself and provide for her family. So let's get into it. Hey everybody, thanks for checking out the My Career Path podcast. I'm super excited today. I have another awesome guest for you talking about helping students in their careers as well as running their own professional organizational business. Dawn, how are you doing?
Great.
Good. So tell us a little bit about what you do, both in kind of your personal business that you kind of have on the side and then as well as your main job.
Yeah. So actually, the professional organizing business, B&B organizing, is what I do full time now. And
okay.
I recently retired from Idaho State University, and that is where I spent the bulk of my career before that. And there the position actually was called instructor coordinator. And I worked in the university honors program at Idaho State University.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you like working at ISU? I know being up here in Pokey, it's a pretty good college.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely loved my time at ISU. It was a hard decision to make to retire early and open up my own business. But I had gotten to the point where I had worked with highly motivated students forever, and I had a huge component of professional development be a part of my first year transition class. And after all these years of saying to my students, make sure that you're planning a life that you just love. Mm-hmm. And I had a life that I just loved working at ISU, but there was something I always wanted to do. And I always wanted to have a professional organizing business. And I had just gotten to the point where I realized if I didn't do it, I never would. And so,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that and that you're kind of moving into what you really love and what you want to do and kind of inspiring yourself from the students. I think that's awesome. So let's kind of just jump into it. Let's go over your career path. Kind of tell me about the very first job you ever held.
Okay, so it was really interesting. I came from a really big family, and work was our way of life. It just was our way of life. So my first job outside of our home was when I was 8 years old. I got a job babysitting 4 neighbor children, and the husband and wife went to the temple once a week. And so I was in charge of making dinner and cleaning it up and getting the 4 kids bathed and in bed. And I was 8 years old.
8 years old, and you were doing that.
It's a different world,
That's
when I was
awesome.
8, I'm trying to think. So I was born in 65, so what it would have been...
Mid-70s?
Yeah. 77. Would that be right? 5... So, yeah. So, it was just a different... It was 72, right? It would be 72. So, It was just a different world, and... children had a lot of responsibility a lot younger in life than we do now. Of course, my own children, my daughter didn't babysit until she was 12 years old. And she had a lot of help, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's when my sister kind of started too, and it was very much like, if you need anything, just call, let us know. Whereas back then, I'm sure it was kind of like, you're on your own, like, just figure it out.
If you're going to do this, you have to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, perfect. Okay, so after babysitting, where'd you kind of move into?
So one of my brothers, I wasn't legally or through the company the age that they wanted a paper carrier. I got a paper route because my brother actually got a different job and he had a paper route. So I assumed the paper route when I was 10.
Nice.
So, yeah, I think I've delivered 56 papers every day. And on Sunday morning, I had to start at 4:30 in the morning folding the papers to get them out on, the porches by...
I was going to say, I always know paper...
6 a.m.
Yeah, paper routes are super early. You get up and you got to make sure everyone gets it before they wake up.
Yeah, so I did it totally by myself through the week, but my mom did drive me on Sunday mornings so that we
nice.
Could
all
get
right, that's good at least. Okay, after the paper route?
So then my next job was I actually did house cleaning and childcare for a woman who was running an apartment complex. And she had so many responsibilities that on Saturdays I would go and I would do a lot of house cleaning for her own apartment and watch her kids so she could do bookkeeping.
Gotcha.
So I was 12 when I was doing that. And then
Okay.
my mom opened up a state licensed daycare when I was 11, so I helped out a lot with that also at that same time.
So you were just kind of involved in anything your parents did, any neighbors that needed help, you were kind of there for that.
Yeah, and it, just was my role. And
Hey, all the better for it.
yes, actually, all the skills, right, that you have. Interestingly enough, you say that involved in everything. My parents had storage units, and so we had to answer the phone very professional when we were young. It was our home phone number that the calls
That the business was, yeah.
Yeah, so we had to answer the phone very professional as a child. We were trained. I knew how to count back change extremely young too.
Which is funny because that's kind of a dying art now.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
honestly.
so funny for me to go to a store still and people just give you the money back and they don't count backwards and they don't give change back.
Yeah.
I knew how to do that when I was 9 years old. You know what I mean? I had a paper route and I had to give the people. And I collected money in checks as a 10-year-old, and counted money back. And it's just really interesting to see,
Oh, yeah. The shift between kind of when you were growing up and kind of where we are now is dramatic.
It's really drastic in your skill set. So it's kind of funny sometimes when I remember when computers, home computers became really popular and people started having them. Well, my kids had them and been working with them in school for a couple of years before I got them. And, they were so fast, it was really hard for me to learn from my kids. They didn't have YouTube back then. If I could have mastered it all by myself.
Right.
YouTube, But, and so they were just dumbfounded that how slow I needed them to show me everything, and I would think, hey, I was counting back change when I was 9 years old. I'm a smart person,
Right. It's just a different set of skills, which I think is really interesting. And a lot of the people I've talked to, they kind of had that similar experience. They growing up in Eastern Idaho or Utah or whoever I've interviewed, they've been like, yeah, we worked on the family farm. We worked from a young age, and we did that forever. And just kind of instilled that kind of hard work, determination, and kind of like, yeah, you're going to work. That's just kind of the expectation.
It was, you felt valued and respected.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting, holding your own, and I did not feel picked on. I think that's interesting because sometimes when you will talk about things, people will be, oh, that was so hard. I was capable. It was
right.
It was what you were doing. You know what I mean? You weren't just sitting there thinking, oh, my life's so hard. You just lived your life. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Well, and it's something that kind of, I read the book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter, and he kind of talks about that, just kind of how we enjoy these kind of normal commodities that make our lives easier. It doesn't mean we have less problems. It just means smaller things feel like bigger problems. And so we feel, maybe that was where the mental health crisis and everything's kind of coming up, where there's a big feeling of anxiety and depression. It might be, we just are so comfortable that maybe we're just not used to it.
Yeah, I really believe that. What was the name of that book? I think that's important to...
The Comfort Crisis.
The Comfort Crisis. I really do believe that because when I was little and something was super hard, I knew if I did it, I would feel stronger and better. Mm-hmm. I knew if I did it, I'd like myself more. Do you know what I mean? Not that I didn't, but that figuring that out, I would be able to do it, and I'd be independent, and I'd have more to offer and stuff like that. And I watch children nowadays, and they will talk about anxiety, and they'll explain it to you. It's very interesting to me.
Well, yeah, and I just think it's different challenges that we experience, where
right.
we feel things differently, and not necessarily that one is better than the other, but the fact that you're kind of challenged and you have to work and kind of go through that kind of builds up kind of a fortitude to these things. You're more resilient. You're more capable, like you said earlier.
Well, and I think that it's interesting. Self-respect comes from meeting challenges.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's kind of an interesting thing to think about because it's something I've thought a lot about, and even starting a new career, a career where I sensed and had natural abilities and gifts, and still, you know, one thing I'm loving about this new career, just like I did with my other career, is the variety of what people want us to organize. And sometimes I come up against something that I haven't organized. I have that skill set and I can, but something I haven't organized yet, and it is really rewarding. But it's a little humbling too, right?
Right. Well, perfect. Let's kind of go into your teenage years. What were kind of the jobs you held in your teenage years?
Okay, so I worked at my mom's state licensed daycare all the way through until I got married. And I got married young. I got married at 18. And I moved to a very small town, Malad, Idaho. It was much smaller in 1983 than it is now.
Yeah, I'm
There's
sure.
a couple of gas stations and things there now. You know, there was a gas station, but so I worked at the Dude Ranch, which was it's a cafe that still exists there, and I was a waitress. And I also worked at the Sweeten Agency, which was an insurance real estate place. So Monday through Friday, half day, I worked at the Sweeten Agency. And then on Friday and Saturday evenings, I worked at the Dude Ranch.
Gotcha. Well, that's awesome. So you kind of got the waitress thing, and then you kind of started probably your organizational skills. You kind of developed those a little bit more there too, huh?
Right. And, you know, it was interesting. A lot of it started when I was very young, and my mom would like go get food storage, and we need to make it fit, right? So that's a beginning. And then sharing a bedroom with sisters and trying to make things fit. And for some reason, I just had a real knack for it, and I loved it too. It was also very satisfying to me. Mm-hmm. And my sisters wouldn't want to have to do that, and I loved it. It gave me a great big sense of satisfaction when I got it to fit right. It looked good, you know.
My family always called it playing Tetris, whether it be packing the car, you know, kind of doing storage or whatnot. It's just like that. You got to make sure everything lines up, you know, and it just fits well.
What do we need first, and what has to be used to get, and what? And it was rewarding to me.
Perfect.
So once my first child was born, he was premature, and he wasn't supposed to be around other children till he was a little bit older. And so what I primarily did, you know, for quite a big span of time, is I was a stay-at-home mom and really focused on my children. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't ever have anybody diminish what you're learning doing that. There are so many skills that come from living on a budget and, you know, living within your means. I lived in a 950 square foot home, and there eventually ended up being 6 of us. So to make it still be a beautiful home and orderly and where the kids could play and all that, I had to highly utilize the little storage area in the basement that was super, super teeny, just barely bigger than the furnace, and the attic of that home. And rotate everything in and out for seasons for my kids' clothes, you know, because we have seasons in Idaho. And rotate things in and out for developmentally where age they were for their appropriate toys and stuff. And, you know, sometimes I think that women feel, and then nowadays men choose to also be the stay-at-home parent and nurture like that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't realize how wonderful those skills are, right? The active listening that an attentive parent has to do, the schedule building, the, you know, planning.
Oh, there's so much juggling that goes on.
There's so much in there that I learned, but I also valued it and knew that it was transferable. I understood that it was transferable.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, and I would totally agree with that, especially kind of being, I mean, you're a role model to your kids. You're kind of the CEO of the home for most of the day, and, you know, almost all day when the husband comes home too, in a way. And so you're really like, okay, how are we going to get this done? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure everything's checked off? I mean, you're doing so much managerial work and kind of administrative things that you might not realize.
Yeah, and one thing that I didn't realize that I was developing, I wasn't as aware of how it was a very humbling situation. My children, almost all of them were born very, very premature, and my second child had a disease where her skull had grown too fast in the womb, and she needed surgery when she was really little. And at that time, my husband was between jobs, and so it was an issue with insurance. So to make sure that she got the high quality care, and a fine neurosurgeon did her surgery, I went and met with him and explained our situation and set up a payment plan with him.
Wow.
And I did that with her pediatrician. And I was learning how to negotiate. I was learning how to advocate for myself, and I also learned how wonderful people are, because I remember her pediatrician sitting across from me, and he said, "Come here." And he took me to his front desk office people and said, "If she pays $10 a month, that's all she can pay, and it's paid. There will be no financial charges. If she, and she will pay more as soon as she can." And I remember when I was able to start paying him $50 a month, I sent a card to him, and I said, "Please, I know you don't have the time normal, but I'm up to 50 right now, and when I got him paid off, I sent a thank you card too. And it's just these things that you learn about how to deal with situations. And yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so kind of after that, when did you kind of finally decide to go to ISU and kind of start working outside the home after that?
Okay, so when I was 36 years old, this is funny because of how young I was. When I was 36 years old, my youngest was in 8th grade, and I decided that I had 2 quarters of college done at Weber State College. It was a college at the time I was going in. It was on quarters. I had that done, and he was in 8th grade. My children were thriving and doing well, and so I felt like I could return to the whole thing. With me going to school in Malad, Idaho, I would have to commute because they didn't have all the distant learning and all that. So I was going to have to commute, and it was going to be a matter of when my kids got on the bus, I was headed out, but I was going to be home before they got home. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like that was a good time. I had the dream of becoming a seminary teacher. I couldn't think of anything more valuable than being able to teach the gospel to students who are at ages where they were making really important decisions in their life, developing their own value system independent of their parents. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. And I found out I needed to have a bachelor's degree to do that. So I started earning my bachelor's degree. And by the way, I cleaned the hospital, Oneida County Hospital. I cleaned the floors at night so I could afford gas.
Wow.
I traded off with my 2 teenage boys. We all, one of my sons was in the band, and when he had to go to events, then I covered, and the other one was in sports, and you know what I mean? We 3 shared it, but it was my gas money to get to the university.
That's awesome. Wow, you were just a hard worker throughout your life. That's amazing.
Well, and that was streamlined too, because I would ask the teachers if I could record their lectures, and some allowed it and some didn't, but I could just listen to that while I was cleaning the floors.
While
so
you're
that
cleaning.
was my study time too, Yeah.
Well, perfect. What kind of bachelor's degree did you kind of go for? What was your main focus?
What was interesting is it was hard for me to decide what one to get. I started taking some education classes because I thought I'm going to be a seminary teacher, and it didn't feel right to me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh no, I was just going to get my secondary teaching degree with an emphasis in history,
Right.
And the education stuff, it just didn't feel right. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And so I remember being very oh my gosh, if I need something that I can fall back on. To become a seminary teacher back then was extremely competitive. It was in 2005 to 6 when I was literally in the program, and that's when I was going to be there. And so I was like, if I don't make it, I've got to be able to, I've got to be able to make my way in this world, because I was also getting, at times I had to do student loans to pay for, for my tuition. So it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to be able to pay this back, and help out also, right?
Right. Yeah.
My kids were
I want to contribute.
and going to school and all that, and I needed to be able to contribute. And so I was trying to decide what to do. And I remember talking to one of my professors and telling him, I don't feel right about this, but I need skill sets. I need stuff that's marketable so that I can. And he started laughing really hard, and he was like, Dawn, what about speech? What about communication? And I was like, but how do you know you can get a job? And he says, you don't realize how marketable this is, do you? And I said, it's so easy, anybody can do it. And he started laughing, and he said, it's easy for you. It's not easy for others.
Exactly.
Right? I didn't think anyone would have to pay anybody for those things, And so he said, it's easy for you. And that was a big turning point for me. And so what I did, I just thought, you have to market yourself after you get this degree. Why don't you just do a degree that you would just love? Why don't you just go for what you're passionate about and see what happens? I had never thought like that in my life. I'd always just done what was presented, what was needed by my neighbors, what was actually thrown at me in a need. I had never thought in terms of what you would just love, other than the seminary thing. That was the first time where I thought, I'm just going to do what I just love. But but still, it was like, that's way out there, right? That's the big dream, but I don't know. And so what I did is I found out at the time at Idaho State University, they had a degree, a program that was called American Studies. And you could choose one area. You had to choose 3 areas. You had to get 24 credits in one area. You had to do 18 in one, and you had to do 12 in another. Yeah. And so what I did was history, philosophy, and communication.
That's awesome. And I think I also just kind of want to echo that point where you said earlier, where they said it's easy for you, and you're able to identify kind of what a big talent is for you, and whether it be something as simple as communication, but some people have the hardest time kind of communicating and being able to do that clearly so that others can follow along and understand is a real skill to have.
Yeah, and I just loved it. I did debate in high school, and debate is not high-end corporate communication, but some of the skill sets that I learned from that were, like actually relying on factual evidence and experts and things like that, right? I mean, so laid down the background. It's not a way that you would want to communicate with people, when you're approaching them to build a business connection. But there was key aspects of it. Key aspects of it, like I said, that, consider the source, expert, finding the best expert, the most knowledgeable, letting their credibility speak for you and things like that had laid down the foundation. That really was advantageous to me, what I mean? And so that was a scary but exciting time in my life. And then I actually was in the seminary program, and I was asked to take over for a seminary teacher who had to leave during the school year. And because that was going so well, I thought, my dream's coming true. This is going to happen, right? And so I did that. That was a really busy time in my life, because I was in my last semester of school, and I was student teaching. And anyway, when it came down to it, I did not get hired.
Oh, no.
And it was one of the hardest things that I've ever experienced in my life, because I felt like it was the thing I was most passionate about. I felt like I was doing well. It was just hard. It was a huge disappointment and a heartache. And me and a couple of the other men that were in the program at the time, when we didn't make it, and some of the other people did, but we didn't make it. And sometimes when we crossed paths with each other, we would joke we were in God's army,
That's right.
God's navy is what we were. God's navy. We just did, we did the work, but it didn't work out, and it was hard. It was really, it was kind of almost like, if I can't do that, what I'm most passionate about, how am I going to be good at anything?
Right.
What am I going to do? It's a really painful time for me. And a man who had gone through the seminary teaching program with me, he was working as the register at Idaho State University. And a woman in Central Academic Advising, where I was a peer advisor, so I had just graduated, and she ran into him and said, "Hey, where's Dawn? Where did she get placed? What's she going to be doing?" And he goes, "Hey, she didn't make it."
She's not.
She's not. And the woman was shocked, and she said, do you know how to get a hold of her? Can you have her call me? And so he sent an email to me, and I called her, and she offered me a graduate assistantship right there on the phone.
Wow.
I know. I was just like, my biggest heartache, I'm trying to process it, but also this amazing, amazing opportunity. And I was filled with a lot of just concern about my ability to succeed, and what if I do this whole 2 more years, what am I going to do with that? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I didn't have a program picked out, but they were on a real tight time frame to give that graduate assistantship. So I had a week to find out. I had a week to
figure it out.
To figure it out and get signed, into the program and accepted and go for it. And it all worked out. But I decided to go with into communication, a master's of rhetoric, which is communication and persuasion. And that all came together in a week, and then I was, so I was.
Well, awesome.
So I graduated in December, and in January I started in my program and started as a graduate assistant.
Wow.
So that was unreal.
Well, and I'm sure that helped you bounce back, because I think a lot of people have that same kind of a feeling where you think you're passionate about one thing, and maybe you are, and you kind of get into it, and then you kind of go, this isn't actually what I thought it was going to be. This isn't actually as good as I thought it was going to be. And to kind of have to pivot or change, kind of like start over in a sense, where you're like, now I don't know what to do, but then to kind of bounce back, and life kind of has a way of working out.
Yeah, so here I am in this program. I'm earning, a master's, but it's like, what am I going to do when I get done with this?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say no to this opportunity.
Right.
And it was interesting. So, guess what year I completed my master's degree? 2008, the Great Recession. Hiring freezes across the land like you cannot believe. So
right.
I went through that experience of looking for jobs, spending the time of developing a very tailored cover letter for that position and a resume that really reflected my ability to do that job. I would send it in, and like 2 weeks later I'd get "We're so sorry to let you know that
we've gone with another candidate."
Freeze.
Yeah.
No, we're going through a hiring freeze.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Hiring freeze. And you'd be like, "Give me those hours back. I need to, but everywhere was, and so I literally had to go to Convergys, a call center, just to keep my house, and to keep going. I mean, I didn't mention, right when I found out that I wasn't going to make it as a seminary teacher and stuff, my marriage fell apart also. So now I'm in earning a master's degree, living in a basement apartment, and I had a home out in the country with 19 acres and a big home, and it was wonderful, and boy, I was starting over. I mean, at 41, I was starting all over, totally all over. And it was amazing to me. I was really grateful for that graduate assistantship, because it gave me a focus, and I really had to start investigating jobs, and I filled out so many applications, cover letters and resumes. I mean, and they were hiring freezes, and they would said, we were very impressed, please apply in the future, you know.
Wow.
But I'm like,
like, come on,
you know. So I had to go to Convergys to just hold on to my house. But there was something interesting that happened there. Mm-hmm. Very quickly, I became a trainer. And I was introduced to a cognitive psychologist work where he had these, Gane, and he had these 9 events of learning. And I started developing all my lesson plans based on that from the future, and it helped me become a powerful teacher. So it was so interesting that it was there that I got a teaching format that really spoke to me and I could succeed and do really well with. So it was kind of a really wonderful blessing that I ended up going there.
Yeah, and it just further enhancing your communication skills, being able to communicate ideas and teach. That's amazing.
It was just unreal that's where I got the teaching training that really clicked with me, and I was successful inside of utilizing. So when I was at Convergys, this is very interesting. A woman who was doing her undergrad while I was doing my master's in the same, department, I helped. What I would do in the communication lab is I would give students feedback on their speeches as a graduate teaching assistant there. So I started out as a graduate teaching assistant in central academic advising, and then I went and became a graduate teaching assistant in the comm department.
Gotcha.
And a woman that was in her undergrad who she just ran the desk, checking people in and out in the lab. She ended up having to set up an office really, really quickly. And she saw me work with those students all for 2 years. And she reached out to me and said, hey, I need an employment specialist that can help review resumes and help people write cover letters. I know how you treat anybody who walks in the door. Come work with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just the importance of kind of having those relationships, having those connections.
It was unreal. And it was unreal because we did not develop a friendship there. We were kind to one another, but I was 41 and she was very young, and
right.
We were good to each other, but it wasn't like we became best friends and then she went and got, it was just, she saw my work ethic, she saw who I was, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And she knew she wanted me. And so I was there, and I was there for 9 months. No, it wasn't even 9 months. It was 7 months. Mm-hmm. And then the woman who was actually the director over Central Academic Advising called me and said, please apply for this position.
Wow.
An advisor position had come up. They were on a hiring freeze, but they were able to hire at least one more advisor over time. So that was a whole year later.
And how long did you stay in that position afterwards?
I stayed there for 5 years. I was in Central Academic Advising for 5 years. Interesting, very quickly after I got on, so there's a director in that program, and then the next person in line was the senior advisor. And within 9 months, I was the senior advisor.
Wow, that's awesome.
So it happened fast, and I feel that having the big dream of becoming a seminary teacher and then it not working out, I feel like I was a much better advisor than I would have been had I not experienced it not going, and the importance of plan B, and
right.
Looking for opportunities and turn to warm connections you've made, and you know what I mean. I was a way better advisor.
Yeah, you had so much experience that you could draw from that really get your points across, get your teaching across to say, hey, this is what has worked for me. This is what works.
Right, and as I learned so much when I was in that employment specialist position, it was helping people who were trying to gain employment, and I learned so much during those 9 months that I actually could use with my students. And it was like, back then, for every $10,000 more you want to earn, add 18 months on to how far out it's going to be for you to get the job. So that's 18 more months of experience, or 18 more months of, things like that. And when you hit like 42,000 and above, it's going to be an additional 18 months. And nobody ever tells you that until you're in there scratching and digging for it, right?
Right, until you're trying to get to it. Yeah, that's an awesome point.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm talking more of the degrees where we have to show that we are capable of it, and we do it all the time, and we're all over the place. I'm not talking about, you license to become a doctor or a nurse or something like that. I'm talking about with your other degrees where you have to do that.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of go into your organizational business that you started with your daughter, because I think that is, I love talking with people about their entrepreneurial adventures and whatnot. So how did you guys decide to create that?
So what over the years, I had gifted friends and family organization as a gift, like a birthday present, a Christmas present, like when they had a baby. I wouldn't buy diapers and stuff for people. I'd say, I'm going to give you 6 hours of organizing. I'll help you set your nursery up, or I'll come help you, do your storage room now that your baby's here, or you know what I mean? And so I had done that for a long time, and almost every time I'd get done, people would say, you should start a business. People need this help. You should go into business for it yourself. People really need this. Yeah. And it was so easy for me, and I loved it. I couldn't imagine that people would pay for it. And then what happened a couple of years ago, it just became very trendy. I started seeing it all over the place. And I was like, people are paying for it. They're not just sisters and aunts helping each other and best friends helping each other do closets. They're getting paid to do it, Yeah. And sometimes when I would watch some of the shows and stuff, I'd say, this is so impractical. I mean, it would just rub me wrong the way they had set it up. It was going to be very hard for a family to maintain that the way that it was set up. A huge emphasis on the aesthetics, but the functionality, and these can be very functional and beautiful at the same time. But function has to come first if people are going to be able to maintain it. Right.
In order to sustain something, I mean, people have to continue to kind of be like, yes, this is where this goes. This is how this works. And do it every time. It has to be kind of intuitive.
You have to ask your client, where would you go to find that? Right? If you had to get the screwdriver, where would you go to find that? And you have to, and what do you use most has to be most accessible. And a lot of times that's big stuff that, you know what I mean, that you're going to have to work around it. It's still going to look beautiful, but the function of the whole thing has to come first. And then it'll work out, and it'll be beautiful and laid out well. But it was interesting that I'd be like, oh gosh, help them. And so that was like, I'm going to help them.
Yeah. And so you guys kind of created this idea. And then what were kind of the first steps? Did you do like a website? Did you kind of just do referrals from friends and family? How'd you kind of get going?
So what we did is we literally took a class, how to grow and start your own business. And we learned about Instagram and social media and all that. We did some of those things before we even had our grand opening. So we started in January of 22. And working on it and looking into it and getting our LLD, our business set up as S Corp. And we did all of that before we made a cent. We did all of that. And I was still working, so I had income to put towards it. And then we did our grand opening September 15th, 2022. But I mean, it was interesting because we read a book called Traction. And that was really helpful in developing our mission statement, what we wanted to be about. It was powerful because in that book, it talks about having a weekly meeting and how to structure a meeting and how to, you have to evaluate yourself each week too on how your meeting went. And we knew this was imperative for us because we're mother and daughter.
Right.
And it helped us to be in that role as business owners when we're doing that hour and 10 minutes. We keep it to 70 minutes. And that book was so crucial and so powerful in helping us learn how to.
It's called Traction.
It's called Traction. And in the book, he helps you realize your business is not you. It's an entity in and of itself. And you really have to understand that, because there's times your business is going to be booming, and there's times it's not going to be as busy, right? And things like that. And your business, you have to be able to see it as something you created, but it's not you.
Yeah. It's something that you're kind of working on maintaining, but it's separate. And I think also with kind of working as a mother and daughter, you kind of have to separate that a little bit as well. I've worked with small businesses where it's kind of, family members, brothers or whatnot, and they have to work hard at it. Sometimes things are said that doesn't mean that it's talking about your character or your person in general, but something that needs to be done in the business.
It's really interesting too, because my daughter and I have very different strengths, and there have been really hard moments because we have very, very different strengths. So she is very much more practical on the money side of things, and I am this, organizer, right?
Yeah.
I'll be like, and we need this, and this, and we need that, and she's like, okay, so are they going to order it? Are they, you know what I mean? And,
right.
and have you communicated that with them? Have have they agreed to pay for that? Or is it something that you want for them, but they don't want for themselves? That
right.
It's really been interesting, and we see things so differently. It's funny because we are mother and daughter, and that is our strength, and it's what's helped pull us forward. And it's so interesting, like when we met with a team to do our website, we had designed our own website, and got us through a little bit, but we weren't happy with it. It was very obvious it had been done on Wix.
Gotcha.
It just
it's that simple template that kind of a lot of people do.
And it got us a certain distance, but we didn't feel like it reflected our brand, the quality of our organizing. And so we felt like that was important. And we met with the team, and they were laughing their heads off at how different we were.
Between you and your daughter? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So they'd be like, okay, so are we okay?
Yeah, exactly.
And we're equal owners in the business too. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I own more, or she. You know what I mean? No.
Right? Yeah. Like we're complete partners.
Authority or decision making power. So, and but I love how much we've grown. And we've had to, we've had to say, hey, please don't say that in front of a client. Both of us have had to say that to each other, Let's save that for our Monday morning meeting. We have a meeting every Monday at 9. And to protect our family members, we don't talk about our business at family events. That was something we decided early on when we were doing this, is that we didn't want anybody else to feel like we were closer, or we don't talk about it at.
We didn't want to isolate anyone else just because. I could see that. Yeah.
And two, you could get burned out, right? If you didn't have a break from it, you could get really burnt out.
Yeah, no, I get that too.
This is our family time, This is like,
we're gonna separate it.
Yeah.
So, if someone were to apply for a job at Escort, at your organizational company, what would be kind of the main traits that you would look for in an applicant?
It's gonna probably not be what people would think. Active listening. You're in people's spaces, and a lot of individuals who reach out to us have mental health issues that have caused things to be the way they are, or they've had a really traumatic brain injury, or they've had they were a primary caregiver to somebody for a long time, and that's why their space got out of control a lot of times. So you can have these grandiose ideas of what you want to do in their space, but you have to listen to them and work with them where they're at.
Yeah.
You're going to want, you're going to want any downsizing. So there's like different aspects of organizing, right? And downsizing almost is always the key to get it to be more functionable so that they can maintain it. But some individuals are not ready to do that. They can do that with coaching and support and help. But if you go into aggressively with it, it'll cause a shutdown, and then what you're doing is you're left just to organize all of it, and it's pretty challenging. Yes, you can make it look better, but they're probably not going to be able to maintain it without some downsizing that's done with some, really listening and caring.
Yeah, really making sure you're understanding the real needs of your client, I think. And I think that's key in a lot of businesses and a lot of positions, is being able to understand what is needed and how do we come to a compromise of kind of to get there.
Right. A person who their ego is in check, they're really right with themselves, and it's more important that they're serving and helping that person. Transformative steps moving forward.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Dawn, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about your story, your life, and your career. One more quick thing before I let you go. Yeah. What is one of the funniest stories or experiences you've had over your career path? I just think it's awesome to hear people's funny stories that they kind of look back on and maybe chuckle or laugh.
I know one that was real fun for me. So when I started advising in 2009, there was a lot of students from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and that attended Idaho State University. And I loved working with these students. I just loved working with them. And I had a dress that was kind of gathered right here.
Okay.
And young man, just think culturally where he's from, a woman being pregnant would be, a really respected, very, she's a mother, right? I mean, that's probably the predominant role for women in their society. And so he asked me when my baby was due, and I wasn't pregnant,
Oh, no!
The way the dress was gathered, and I said politely to him that I wasn't pregnant, but he was mortified, And
of course, who wouldn't be?
Yeah, he was mortified. I said, no, I get it. And he just kept saying, no woman would dress like that. Why I am without being pregnant. She wouldn't have the gathers. Ooh, Yeah. Anyway, he was mortified, and I helped him a lot of different times and helped him with different things, and he kept coming back and for advising sessions, and he was struggling in some classes, and I showed him how to get the tutor's help, and called and found out there was other tutoring in that department, all kinds of things. Anyway, he came back so that was in the fall, and he went home for the break, winter break, and he came back in the beginning of the winter semester, spring semester, and he brought me, it was so unreal. All the stuff he brought me a coat, some shoes, a dress, a whole bunch of figs. His family has a fig farm and everything. His mother told him he had to be super good to me until he got his degree because he was so hurt. He hurt my feelings.
He was so mortified. Oh my goodness.
He told his mother, and she always made him bring me stuff. And I was like, no, I'm good. No.
It's okay, yeah.
Yeah, he felt so terrible. He felt so super terrible about it,
That's awesome.
There was always those funny situations too where a student was kind of advisor shopping, where we're looking at the case notes of the last advisor, and a student's in front of you saying, oh, she told me to take all online classes because that would probably help me out. And I'm reading right here. I highly encouraged him as a first semester student to take in-person class.
Yeah.
So you have that situation of, how do I work with this? Because they're going to shut down if you say, you're not telling me the truth,
Oh, yeah. No, it goes back to that active listener thing where you kind of know what they need, and whether that be what they want to hear or what they need, kind of you have to be able to know that difference. That's funny.
Yeah, it's so you'd have to sit there and think, how could generally we advise students to do more in-person classes in their first semester.
Yeah, to kind of get going.
I'm sorry that happened, and let's make sure that most just and you're trying to be really respectful, and that colleague, and how they so you always had to be really careful and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of very, very funny things that happened.
So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Huge thanks to Dawn for actually joining me on this week, sharing her story. I always love when people come on the show, talk about their stories, their past, and hopefully give you guys a good guide into something that you might want to do in the future. If you did like this episode, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and make sure to comment down below what careers you guys are interested in. I'd love to get people on the show to actually talk about their career. I've got a couple other people lined up, and I'm always willing to talk to some more people. So until next time, I'll catch you guys later. See ya.